Hello, my name is Barry Tibbetts and I'm the town manager for the town of Windham. And what I'd like to cover with you is the historical and current building growth that has been occurring in Windham. And I'm going to bring a number of different slides into this presentation to show you some historical data from 1980 all the way through 2023, what those impacts are and what we're seeing, so make sure that everybody is well informed about where we're at with growth here in Windham. So in this slide here, I just want to cover a number of quick points about the growth ordinance. The growth ordinance was enacted in August of 2020, and it really was a plan to show where residential growth would occur, how to handle the immediate housing needs, how to ensure that we have fairness in the allocation of the allowable permits that would be given, and how to monitor those, everything from residential to multi-unit, and to ensure that we have reasonable growth by really trying to maintain the rural character of the town. Some basic information about how the growth ordinance works. Basically, it's one permit for a dwelling, whether it's a two-family or multifamily. Non-issued permits go to the reserve pool for future use potentially. And the annual allocation of growth permits, as currently within our ordinance, we allow for 118 new single-family homes, 14 new two-family homes, and 3 multifamily homes. We've also restrict the areas of the farm district, which represents 60% of the zoning here in Windham, to only 45 growth permits. So we're not trying to place more growth in the farm area, but we're trying to limit the growth there and focus the growth more in our village center areas and in our commercial zones. You'll also see that we have some options within this ordinance to allow for affordable housing, and that we restrict the number of permits that any one developer can obtain in any one year to ensure that a broader use of the public have the ability to get growth permits as necessary. There are some exemptions to the growth ordinance. So if you're repairing or replacing or reconstructing of a dwelling units, those are exempt. You can get more information on all of this, obviously, through our code office. If you gifted a family lot to a son, daughter, uncle, child, there's a broader definition on that. There's no growth permit needed. For repair and reconstruction, there's no growth ordinance permit required. And we also have in our growth ordinance the ability to issue some additional permits for affordable housing as necessary. This slide just basically shows you what the current town populations are based on 2022 data. And you can see that Windham is really in the top 5 of the larger towns, or the top 4, I should say. But these communities that are used in this example are pretty similar to us as far as services that are provided. So it just kind of gives you a picture of what's happening around us. Again, this is another slide showing area growth rate, which doesn't, on the far right, you can see the actual current population. But in this case, what we looked at was, what's the growth rate over the 10-year period from 2010 to 2020? Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, why didn't we go to 23? The data just isn't there. But I can tell you from looking at the data that if you were to take 21, 22, and 23 and add those numbers back into this factor, that red line that you see for Windham probably isn't going to be at 10%. It's probably going to be closer to 10 or 11%. But either way, it still puts us in the 5 fastest growing communities here within Cumberland County. So this slide shows building permits from 1980 all the way up through 2023, and it shows a breakdown of what those building permits are like. So the blue is single family, that lighter yellow color is two family, the darker red color is multifamily, that's 4 or more units, and then accessory apartments are in the gray area. And you can see back in the 80s, we have, at the top, we had a lot of family single-family homes. We also had a lot of multifamily. And then that kind of died off through the 90s and 20s, and even into 2010. And it didn't pick back up until really around 2021, 2020, where we started to see more two-family come in and multifamily. The other thing that's interesting about this slide when you look at it is there is a cyclical approach to the number of permits. It goes up and down. There are peaks, and then it drops, and then it comes back up, and then it drops back down. And that helps us to understand what actually is the building cycle, or the change in patterns in housing. And of course, that's subject to what the interest rates are, what the availability is. There's a number of factors that fall into that, but there are cyclical patterns here. In this slide, we just wanted to try to show you what's actually happening by growth by subdivision permits. And you can go back to 2015, you can see there were 42 permits issued, 73 permits, 29 permits issued, all in different subdivisions. And then it really started to take off in 2018 and 2019. 2020, it dropped back down, and we put the growth ordinance in, remember, in August of 2020. And that regulation went up a little bit, but then it dropped back down to 62. If you pull this slide up by downloading it off of our website, you'll see that it drops a little bit farther from 62 down. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is that we made some changes in our zoning in 2020. We went to a conservation subdivision. We put in some new road standards, and that dropped down the total number of new subdivisions come in, and really what it did was it refocused where that building was going to occur, which is more in our more dense areas where we want it to grow, not in our farm areas, to keep that rural characteristic. So in this slide, this is just a snapshot of 2023. And I think what's interesting about this, when you look at this, you can see here in the C1 zone where that red dot is, we basically had a total of 14 permits that came in. Where the growth was down here in VC, and that's where the majority of the growth is, along with the RM. And those tend to be your smaller lot areas, and also allow for larger apartment buildings and or condo developments. So that was it's just interesting when you're starting to look at the data that what we heard from the public in 2018, 19, 20, up until the time that growth ordinance came out, was there was a preservation of the farm and the farm residential areas that we wanted to try to make sure we preserved, and that's clearly we're limiting that growth in those areas. In this slide, we're talking about the permit changes by zone and by year. And what we wanted to show was what actually happened in 2020, now over to 2023 in the different zones because of the changes we made with our zoning. And I think what's interesting here with the growth ordinance, you can see in the farm area in 2020, you see this red dot circling here, there were 69 permits. But now, because of the restrictions we put in the growth ordinance, we were only issuing 22 permits in 2023. You'll also see there's a decrease in the RM zone here from 50 down to 15. But if you look at the pink area, which is your C1, C2, C3 areas, that's where you have it's a more commercial base. You can see that there's definitely an increase in those areas for growth, which is consistent with what we wanted to see in the growth ordinance when it was put in controlling the growth. I think this slide is really easy to understand and just really shows for us what's happened with growth permits and how close have we come to reaching the cap. So under state law and our growth ordinance, we have, since it was instituted in 2020, we have a cap of no more than 135 permits that can be issued. But during this time, since 2020, all the way through 23, we did have a surge here in 21. It went up, but we never hit our growth cap. And then this has dropped back down. And just as those permits were not issued, you can see the reserve pools here, the permits were issued, so there's nothing going in the reserve pool. And we kind of crossed this line somewhere in mid-2021. Those those additional permits that were not issued go into the reserve pool, whereas the actual permits issued really fall down into this lower area here, the growth of roughly 40 permits per year, in where we're trying to limit that growth to protect the rural characteristics here in Windham. In this slide here, what we're showing is just what's happening to building and impact fees for the town over the course of the last 4 years. And this will pretty much mirror the slides I showed you earlier on what's happening with the number of permits issued. We had a lot of permits issued in 2020, 2021. It dropped down in 2023. There's less. So there's a little bit less building fees coming in, and that's expected. I think another thing that might help have some clarification is what are impact fees and how do impact fees affect us? What are they? So an impact fee is where we've looked at certain areas in town where we know when new growth comes in other words, new housing comes in, we might have to provide additional services, whether equipment or infrastructure or space, whatever it is, to accommodate the new structures here in town. And we've identified 4 key areas: open space, recreation, police and fire services, and town hall services. And we charge a fee. This fee is only to new construction and additions where there's potentially new folks coming into town. And we're saying, okay, so if we have 100 new people, we know that after X number of people, we're going to have to add an additional police car. Well, we're collecting that money in advance to help cover those costs of the equipment side of that. Or we need more open space for walking or recreation. We're setting some money aside to provide for that. Our regular taxes cover a lot of stuff that we provide for services, but the impact fees allow us to offset that slightly over the course of years by different permits that are asked for by our public. In this slide here, you can see the revenue totals for residential houses and condos versus multifamily units, and you can see that residential homes and condos are far greater than multifamily permits and revenues coming in. I think the key thing to think about here is that we average since 1980 through up to 2023, 107 permits. And particularly over the last 10 years, we've averaged 122 permits per year. The way the state law is written is we look back at the last 10 years and we take 105% of that, and that tells us the minimum number of permits that we have to have available to offer to the public. So you can't say, well, I don't want to issue no more permits. No one else can move into Windham. Technically, we can't do that. We have to make the availability for at least 128 new units to come into Windham. Now whether someone comes in and someone sells their land or they build those units, that may or may not happen. So it could be less. But we have to offer, as our community, we have to offer 128 units. And in our analysis of the 3 different types of properties that come in here, which is really single, condo, and multifamily, we've determined that we really need our minimum should be 135. We don't need to offer more than that. We haven't hit that number as of yet, but so far the ordinance that's in place for management of growth, we are issuing less permits than is available or our minimum is required by state law. So we are, with the new changes that we've put into place within our zoning and our road structures and the requirements for permits and the fees we charge for those permits, is having an effect on the reduction of growth here within Windham. This slide's pretty self-explanatory. It basically shows you those impact fees that are coming in when they peak because there's larger housing. And it kind of shows you on the far right what those balances are. Again, those balances get, those fee dollars get applied through our budget process on various pieces of equipment that the town or the community needs. This is a very revealing slide. This came from the state, and it shows you from 2014 through 2023 what is the actual population changes for RSU school pupils here within Windham. And what's interesting is you see it's really pretty flat. So oftentimes you'll hear, well, there's a lot of new buildings coming in, you're going to overburden our schools, and we won't be able to take care of the capacity. It's going to cost us a lot more money. Well, that's not true. I mean, this clearly shows you that we don't have more students than we had 5 years ago. It's basically at a flat level, and the capacity in our schools is excellent for meeting the needs of what we want to accomplish here for our children. In this slide here, it's question and answers that sometimes are often fairly common. Basically, this is on our website, and you can take a quick read through this, but we talk about, really, does it affect land values? No, it does not. Has it worked as far as the growth ordinance and trying to preserve the farm zone? And my answer is yes, it has, because the total number of permits in that area has gone down. Did Windham ever have a growth ordinance in the past? Yes, we did. It was repealed in 2012 because it was illegal with or inconsistent with state law. With the RSU, they anticipate X number of new students coming in every year, but they also know that there's X number of students that are graduating every year, right? So that balances out from their work. And as you saw in a prior slide, the growth rate here in the Windham area is flat for kids. And that's because we have families moving in and families moving out, or families where the kids graduate and they go on to college and new kids come in. So that's been very effective. The other thing that's interesting is, and we did, this was a local study that we did with a bunch of different developers and a couple different communities that we work with. And we just asked these developers, when you put an apartment up, let's say it's 20 units, how many of those, or it could be 100 units, how many of those units, if from an apartment perspective, 1 or 2 bedroom, have kids that go to school? And generally it's 3 to 5% of those, the total number of apartments have school-age children. Whereas when we looked at duplexes, that number is much higher. It's 25 to 35%. So in other words, if you have 50 duplexes that go in, you could have 15 or 20 kids that end up in school. In both cases, housing is needed at both those levels. But I think it's just important to understand where, if there's going to be impacts, where would those impacts be seen? And there was just a quick study that we thought was interesting that you might enjoy learning about. So here in Windham, the growth ordinance does a number of things. It provides the local control of our resources. In other words, we can protect certain areas that we want to protect. We can target areas of growth, which is occurring. We're targeting it to be more in our commercial districts, which is where we want to see it. It enables us to support opportunities for needed housing. In other words, we can be more flexible in saying we need more senior housing, and so that's where the permits are available for. It also provides consistent revenue flows for budgeting and long-term planning, because we kind of showed you where those numbers come from, permits for building and impact fees. It provides for stability in that area. And finally, it assists in stabilizing the growth for RSU attendance, because that is an important part of our community here, and being able to ensure that we have a not wide fluctuations of new students coming in. It's more at a level playing field, which has been very helpful to the community and for our budgeting purposes. So overall, from my perspective, and I think from my staff's perspective in looking at the growth ordinance, has it been successful in controlling the growth and keeping us within the minimized standards of what the opportunities are through state allocated legislation? And the answer is yes. We are below those standards, we're controlling growth, and it's going where we want. Thank you, and this presentation is available on our website. You can download it, and feel free to contact the town if you have any further questions, and have a wonderful day.